Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be with you today, virtually, even though I can't be there in person. My name is David Obura. I'm a director of Cordia East Africa. We're a marine research organization based in Mombasa in Kenya. And I'm also the current chair of the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, or IPBES. I'd like to thank Dr. Osano and the SEI Africa Center for inviting me to give this keynote presentation. And even though I can't be there with you, I hope this will be of relevance and interesting, and I look forward to follow up from that. Now, my role is from the IPBES perspective. We work on biodiversity and ecosystem services. So that's to talk about integrating climate and biodiversity solutions in support of a bioeconomy for climate resilient development. Now, in IPBES, we have developed a conceptual framework that organizes all the work that we do, all of the assessments that we have conducted since 2016. And this is a simplification of that conceptual framework up in the upper left. This was developed at the same time as the Sustainable Development Framework was really maturing, the Sustainable Development Goals, all built around the three pillars, so nature, economy, and society. I won't go into detail in the conceptual framework itself because it is quite complicated, but I'd like to explain it in the context of the relationships between nature, economy, and society, because I think there's a lot of general principles that we can derive from this to guide future work. So the basis of our conceptual framework is that nature supports economy through our direct uses of natural resources that we extract, the various commodities that we trade in, that these are really provided through ecosystem goods and services or the broader framework of nature's contributions to people, which I'll explain in a moment. Now, economic activities provide societal benefits. These are the income, the health and prosperity that we benefit from, our communities and societies. And of course, there's issues of equality of distribution around the sharing of those benefits. And then in return, societal values, the governance systems that we have, the preferences that we express, our market values, these really impose indirect drivers or controls on economic activity, and those economic activities impose pressures. These might be pollution or climate change. In IPBES terminology, we call these direct drivers on nature and are currently driving its decline. And as I said at the beginning, this is very consistent with the Sustainable Development Framework and the Sustainable Development Goals. I'll come back to this towards the end of the talk, but I like to use the Sustainable Development Goals in a ring like this around a local space, in this case a coastal area, as this is when they become very tangible and we can really understand the depth of what can be done thinking of sustainable development through these goals. Now, through IPBES's global assessment, which was released in 2019, this was really our signature report. We expanded on our conceptual framework. We used the Nature's Contributions to People framework that was developed a few years earlier. And this identifies 18 classes of contributions that we depend on in society, from habitat creation as number 1 to maintenance of options as number 18. And in the global assessment, we showed how most of these are declining, some of them are increasing. Now, the direct drivers is also another area that we have developed quite quantitatively in the global assessment. So we identified 5 direct drivers, so land and sea use change, direct exploitation, climate change, pollution, and invasive alien species. And these contribute to different proportions to biodiversity loss in terrestrial, freshwater, and marine ecosystems. Now, of course, it goes without saying that these direct drivers of decline come from the extraction and the use of those nature's contributions to people that we have maximized through our economic systems. So energy, food and feed, and materials and assistance. These, of course, are the contributions that have been increasing because we have sought to maximize them through our economic systems. And it's this maximization of these 3 contribution areas that are causing the decline in all of the others, because we have been externalizing the costs of extracting those 3. Now, in this session or workshop, we're really focused on biodiversity and climate change together. Climate change is one of the 5 direct drivers. It was rated as third in line in 2019, but it's rapidly growing in importance, as we know from these very well-known CO2 emissions graphs and the icon up there. And what's important here is that in trying to address climate change, we're beginning to look at two other of the classes of nature's contributions to people, so regulation of climate and regulation of ocean acidification, to help us deal with climate change, which of course we have to do, and I'll come back to this later. But the issue is that if we seek to utilize these and implement them with the same maximization frameworks that we've used for the other three that we have traditionally used from nature, we will basically go into a vicious cycle of further declines through maximizing individual benefits. We tend to ignore the other benefits that we get from nature. And so that's the central theme of this talk that I'll come back to as we move forward. I think in terms of thinking about the African context and the integration that we need between biodiversity and climate change, this graphic from the joint workshop report by IPBES and IPCC together, so these multifunctional land and seascapes or shared spaces, these really helps us think about how we need to integrate climate, biodiversity, and human society to be treated as coupled or integrated systems. We need to consider integrated approaches to both climate and biodiversity challenges across land and seascapes. And this needs to be done across 100% of space, of all land and ocean spaces, freshwater spaces. And that's incorporating or including sort of the three types of areas you could think of: the mostly unimpacted or wilderness areas that might really only be homes and the territories of some indigenous peoples and so on, with very low impact on the environment, through the intermediate spaces, or these, and those are indicated in blue in the graphic. Then the intermediate spaces in yellow, where there is pastoral activities or farming, but it's you can still recognize the biotic systems, and then fully converted zones and intensive agriculture and urban spaces, where nature is still present, but in a very much reduced form. And these are all spaces in which we need to think of the integration of nature, the benefits it provides to economic activity and society, and the drivers that we impose on nature that are currently still causing its decline. Now, in the African context, this is work that I've been doing through the Earth Commission, in which we've looked at Earth system boundaries, and there are two of these related to biodiversity. One is the amount of intact natural habitat on land surfaces around the planet. And you can see from this map of Africa that really the challenge that we face on the continent is most of the continent is already less than 50% intact. So all those oranges and reds there. Deserts are the most intact habitat or ecosystem on the continent, but these offer few nature-based opportunities for people and economic development. Forest and grassland systems are significantly altered, of course, by farming, pastoralism, and other uses. I think of greater interest for us in moving forward and thinking about bioeconomy is functional integrity. So this is of already altered habitats where nature is not in its, you couldn't classify it as being unimpacted. And in these spaces, it can range in quality, and the functional integrity relates to the degree to which these ecosystems are able to support nature's contributions to people. So, and here what we see from this map in the middle is that the functional integrity of most landscapes across Africa is actually quite good. Over 90% functional integrity, apart from those oranges and reds we see in West Africa and in Uganda. So altered ecosystems mostly still have a high capacity to support benefits to people. There is high potential for nature-based or ecosystem-based solutions for livelihoods and economy. You could think of this as the bioeconomy, so supporting agriculture, forestry, livestock, fishing, or aquaculture. And of course, the need we have now to integrate biodiversity and climate together. There's high potential for benefits from restoration, so very important to think about how restoration can help, not just in restoring biodiversity, which of course is needed in many places, but in restoring function and support to people. A new sort of threshold that has been identified, that we identified in the Earth Commission for functional integrity, is this 20 to 25% of high function vegetation per square kilometer, so in every square kilometer at local scales, to provide most benefits from nature to people. And I'd like to just explain that a little bit more in this slide here. This is the concept of the safe and just future, or safe and just Earth system boundaries, which have been looked at across climate, biodiversity, nutrients, fresh water, and air pollution. And I'll just explore this functional integrity of already altered habitats and ecosystems. And the concept here is that the safe component is that these are functioning habitats that provide enough ecosystem services to support needs. The just dimension is that people must be able to access these benefits for there to be just, or for justice to be served. And so we used a 1 square kilometer scale, so within the activity range of, probably most people on the continent. And looking at these 6 services listed on the right, we identified that 20 to 25% of well-functioning or high-functioning or semi-natural habitat per square kilometer is needed. And then this relates to that landscape image that I showed a few slides ago, where we can implement restoration and other solutions within local jurisdictions to assure fit to local ecosystems, communities, and governance. But this must be done over 100% of land and ocean spaces and freshwater spaces. Now, in the context of biodiversity and climate solutions together, this is another graphic from the IPBES and IPCC workshop report, where we need to join these actions together because we cannot deal with these crises separately. The challenge is that, as shown in the upper panel, many climate actions are detrimental to natural systems, but most biodiversity-based actions can support climate objectives as well. Of course, not across the board. There's many more blue lines in the bottom panel than there are in the upper panel. But the critical thing about these nature-based solutions or ecosystem-based approaches is that these solutions can be effective only if paralleled with strong emission reductions into the future. Because if we undermine the health of natural systems through excessive carbon dioxide emissions, of course, their effectiveness will decrease over time. Now, I'd like to point towards the IPBES Nexus assessment, which we are currently finalizing, and this is on actions related to biodiversity and climate change, but also particularly in relation to food, water, and health sectors to offer actors solutions or response options that they can implement. This assessment is coming to the IPBES plenary in December this year for approval, and we hope to be able to disseminate it by the end of the year. So coming to the bioeconomy. So this is not a term that we use in IPBES so much because we integrate sort of across many different scientific disciplines, and those contributing to the bioeconomy debate are one of those. But you can see here combining the African continent, this nature economy society model in the middle, and then the 18 classes of nature's contributions to people. Africa's very high dependence on nature-based livelihoods and on all ecosystem services and contributions from neighbor are essentially the quintessential bioeconomy. Our communities, our populations are highly dependent on what would be a bioeconomy. The problem is that the historical approach to maximize monetizable goods and services from nature essentially destroys the other goods and services because we ignore them. And so these are the 3 that I mentioned at the beginning on the right, and then regulation of climate on the left. We really risk undermining our entire bioeconomy if we attempt to continue as we have gone before. And it's incredibly urgent and necessary for us to consider how to balance and optimize across all benefits from nature. And in this graphic, I've tried to illustrate with the green outlines how almost all of the classes of nature's contribution to people are talked about in daily life in local spaces and local government, habitat creation and maintenance, so that could be conservation and restoration, pollination, regulation of air quality, going down to number 8, the formation, protection and decontamination of soils in terms of soil health. All of these are foundations of a bioeconomy, and by focusing on balance across all of the contributions from nature to people and balancing this nature economy society, sustainable development model in the middle, Africa could really reap the benefits of its ecosystems into the future. One element that's critical to talk about that I haven't mentioned yet is finance. And how do we bring finance for nature-based solutions for restoration, rebuilding nature into this space? Now, financial capital essentially represents the accumulation, the value, and then the accumulation generated from economic and societal activities that builds up over time. And of course, we use it to invest in societal and economic activities and assets, and also in nature as well. But wealth has been generated from converting nature and resources via economic sectors. This accumulates as financial capital up at the top. But the problem is we can see that the overconversion from natural to financial capital has caused nature decline as well as climate change. So then the challenge is, how do we get financial capital back into natural capital, which is, of course, top of many discussions now, and discussions on the global biodiversity framework and so on. So reinvesting or returning finance back into nature, it can mitigate climate change by sequestering carbon. Of course, that's a big focus now, but of course we have to do this right. And in that sense, the integration for a bioeconomy of climate and biodiversity solutions are essential to restore biodiversity while attempting to mitigate climate change. We can integrate sustainable production with biodiversity and climate objectives, and we can rebuild the productivity of natural assets to provide all the other services or benefits in those 18 classes of nature's contributions that people are dependent on. And here a critical opportunity is this 20 to 25% of habitat as a minimum per square kilometer to promote co-benefits across all services. Remember, in very intact ecosystems, the amount of habitat will be well above this 20 to 25% level. That's good. We shouldn't try and go down to this limit. It's a minimum above which we should remain or rebuild towards and continue that process into the future. So some recommendations to finish up on a nature ecosystem-based, safe and just future for climate resilient development. I'd like to just leave you with these final thoughts for your discussions. So due to the very high dependence of rural and urban African populations on nature-based livelihoods or ecosystem services, bioeconomy based on full sustainability principles is, I think, the key solution to the challenges that we face in the future and to long-term prosperity for the African continent. We need to balance and secure benefits across all classes of services. So these are the 18 classes we've identified under the IPBES framework. And we need to assure just access to benefits and allocation of finance in the interest of indigenous and local communities and residents, so in equitable ways. Now, when we come to thinking about investment in climate solutions, well, these must not damage ecosystem integrity, and they must not reduce the multiple benefits from nature to people. So these must build on and strengthen all of these and do them at the same time together. So applying a minimum 20 to 25% high function habitat per square kilometer to consider climate and biodiversity solutions may be a key guideline or rule of thumb for moving in the right directions and improving over time as knowledge of a system improves. We need to co-develop climate solutions with rights and stakeholders locally. And then most importantly, we also need to assure control and ownership of biodiversity that is restored in locally appropriate institutions to make sure that the productive capacity on African landscapes and seascapes and waterscapes stays in the hands of local communities, local government, and the national governments in the interest of future prosperity. So I hope this has been interesting to stimulate some of the discussions, and I look forward to hearing the recording afterwards, and I'm very happy to respond to any questions there may be subsequently. Thank you very much.